This week on Head to Head, the original Episode 9 script.
You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Mansell.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
We're your hosts for this podcast. So I don't know if you heard this or not, but they had actually, this is so funny because this is so typical in the Star Wars news cycle these days, right? Where, remember how we were always talking about memes become news and, you know, all this stuff happens? Well,
and what happened now?
Okay, so there was this whole big thing about how the Obi-Wan series was canceled.
What?
Yeah, and I mean, everybody was talking about it and, you know, was doing its usual thing, spreading through social media or whatever, and I was starting to get a little bit nervous about it. Because, you know, if one or two sites or whatever, and they might be a little questionable, start to report something, you could basically dismiss that and go, all right, whatever. But, I mean, when you just keep seeing it over and over, you're just like, oh, man. And you know how I've been looking forward to that.
True.
So the next day, Lucasfilm, everybody came out saying, no, it's not true. Still being developed. Everything's still good.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things about the culture, man. It's just like, you know, a lot of people like throwing fake news out there just to kind of throw people off. And it's just like, no, it's, you know, that even happened here in Detroit where that somebody put out a fake flyer for a job fair, and everybody showed like over 400 people showed up to this one facility to try to get this job.
No way.
Yeah, it was crazy. And then like, you know, they had to turn people away.
That, man.
Yeah, it was on the news and everything. And people people took off work from their actual job to go to this.
Oh, that's just like so wrong,
people were trying to find like babysitters. People just didn't think about the effects that it would have on people's everyday lives. I mean, granted, it's not like, you know, Obi-Wan, if it were being canceled, wouldn't have that effect. I hope not. But still.
It might on me. It might on me. I'm not taking off work, mind you, but.
Well, yeah, exactly. But then there was some other news, too, that everybody heard about. Everybody was talking about Rian Johnson's trilogy being canceled, too. So that was another thing.
Well, you know what? And that's always being rumored to be canceled. I mean, it's like every time you turn around, everybody's saying that that's being canceled.
Yeah, and I think with the success of Knives Out and everything, you know, once again, just proves that he's actually a really good director. So it's not the fact that he doesn't have the skill set. It's just maybe that particular Star Wars movie wasn't for him. But
did you actually see Knives Out?
No, I haven't yet. I still haven't got a chance to see that.
Yeah, you got to, man. It really is.
Yeah, I heard it was
stellar.
Awesome. It's a bunch of movies I still haven't had a chance to see.
I know. I mean, there's like a lot of the main ones I've seen, but, you know, like Jumanji, I saw that. I saw a couple of
I haven't seen that one yet, yeah.
That one's actually a lot funnier than I thought it would be. In fact, in some ways, I still think the original, well, not the Robin Williams one, but the first one with Rock and all those guys.
Okay.
I thought that was actually probably technically the better movie, maybe.
Okay.
But this one was funnier.
Yeah, I heard this one wasn't as good as the first Jumanji, but I heard it was still a pretty, you know, cool movie.
Yeah, and I actually, in a lot of ways, like I said, I thought it was funnier.
I felt that way you did get a chance to see Bad Boys.
Oh, yeah. See, now I haven't seen that one yet.
So to me, like, this Bad Boys had the better story. Like, out of all of them, honestly, it was the best story. But I still find, like, 2 still the most entertaining one out of all of them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So.
All right. Well, now that we've done our whole movie review,
right.
And, we'll actually go to the Cantina, right, and talk about some Star Wars stuff.
Yes, sir.
All right. What do we got first?
All right. So help me with this name because I know I'm going to butcher it. Now I apologize. Is it
Taika Waititi?
Taika Waititi.
Pretty sure that's how you say it. I mean, for all I know, I'm butchering it too.
But Taika Waititi, director of Thor Ragnarok and a couple of episodes of The Mandalorian, is being courted by Lucasfilm to direct a new Star Wars film. So what do you think about it?
That actually excites me. Because if I'm not mistaken, he directed the season finale of The Mandalorian. And that was one of my favorite episodes.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And, you know, obviously the other movies that he's done have just been so good. And I think that they capture the essence of what he's going for and what the franchise, because that's the problem. A lot of times what you get is you get these directors that try to put almost like too much of their own stamp into something.
All right.
And they don't really respect the franchise enough. That was my biggest fear way back in the 90s. Quentin Tarantino was actually approached to do Halloween 6 at that point. And it's kind of like, okay, a Quentin Tarantino Halloween film sounds very interesting to me, but I'd be afraid that it would be too much like a Quentin Tarantino film, very much the same way Rob Zombie's version was. Mm-hmm. You know, it's almost like, well, it's more of a Rob Zombie movie than a Halloween movie.
Right.
You know, and that's where I sometimes get really freaked out by a lot of these directors that get called on to do these movies, and it's like, well, is it going to be too much of their thing? Mm-hmm. You know, whereas I think with this, he's a fan of Star Wars. And I think that that's where the differentiation is going to come in.
Yeah, I always think that, you know, when you're looking at directors for Star Wars, one, I think they really should be fans. I think that's kind of
absolutely.
I think that's kind of imperative that they have that as a prerequisite to be a director of a Star Wars film. Just simply because they understand how fans are going to perceive things, they understand the lore, they understand everything that kind of goes with it. And that's kind of one of my issues too, like with directors. And, you know, as we kind of progress through today's show, a lot of things are going to be kind of, no pun intended, or not to sound redundant, but directed around as far as the directors, writers, things of that nature.
Well, I think that's a good idea because, you know, as you know, and as our next few shows are going to address, we're in, like we said last week, the aftermath of Rise of Skywalker. So the Skywalker saga is done.
Yep.
So now it's almost like where we were at after Return of the Jedi, like right before Force Awakens. It's like, well, what are we going to get now from Star Wars? There's no defined, thing.
Path.
It's not going to be like Episode 10's going to carry on the story of Rey, Finn, and Poe. I mean, it's a wide open field. So absolutely, we got to discuss that.
And that's one of my things is that with directors, you know, I'm not so, of course it's like, oh, this new hot director did this movie. This new hot director did that movie.
Well, you brought this up.
Yeah. And I just really
a lot of shows that we've done.
Yeah. I really don't think that's the thing. I think you need to find someone who truly understands Star Wars. And I think if you really can get that type of director in here who can really speak to the fans, who can really, you know, just convey everything that we know and love about Star Wars and also kind of bring their own flair to it, if you will, then yes, I think they'll be a good fit. But just to say, oh, well, we're getting, you know, Michael Keaton's going to direct a Star Wars movie. It's like, what? Like, what is he? I mean, unless he's really truly a fan like that.
Well, and I mean, even using, you know, the other thing, it's like, exactly. It's like, you know, getting anybody to do it where it's just, okay, we're just going to get the flavor of the month director or, you know, whatever. I mean, unless somebody, like you said, unless they're a fan or unless they come to them with a really cool story, you know, that they want to tell. Because sometimes, like, for instance, Werner Herzog, right? It's great in The Mandalorian.
Yep.
Well, he didn't really, you know, he didn't even really know what Star Wars was really before he took that role. You know, he was like, kind of like had a cursory awareness of it, but
I mean, it's kind of like Alec Guinness, though. Like, you know, like Alec Guinness is a good example. Like,
he's a great example because he ended up actually hating Star Wars.
Exactly, but he's like one of the most iconic characters of all time.
Look at the job that he did. I mean, he brought like such a heart, such a humanity. I mean, such a gravitas to Obi-Wan.
Definitely.
I mean, he set the bar for that character, and it's like, here's a guy who at that time nobody even really knew. I mean, half the actors are famous for saying like, we didn't even know what was going on. I mean, we'd show up, we're doing these scenes, we don't even know what this is.
You got these robots walking around.
Yeah, and it's like it was just so new to everybody. But even though, because at first Alec Guinness, he wasn't really nuts about it, but he didn't hate it like he did. Because even with Empire and Return of the Jedi, he really didn't want to return, but he had to. He was contracted to. So. You still look at the job he did, though.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I wouldn't rule out a director coming on board that wasn't necessarily a fan, but just knocked it out of the park.
Yeah.
But I think in Taika, we're going to get I was really excited when they were talking about that.
Okay, yeah. We'll just have to see what they kind of come up with for that movie.
Well, I'm still wondering. So, it makes you wonder, like, remember how they announced that Kevin Feige was doing a Star Wars movie? Now, nobody was really sure whether or not he's producing it or kind of, almost taking on like a Marvel-ish type of role.
Right.
And he's going to get a director, or whether he was going to do it himself. And if Taika's being, courted for this, it almost seems like it's like the Marvel Star Wars now.
Yeah, and that's
you get the Marvel guy kind of overseeing it, and then he uses one of his directors that has worked on a film or two of his that
he trusts the whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know, but we'll see.
We'll see. But what about you guys? What do you think? Are you really excited, about this decision that, or at least they seem to be courting him, or do you guys think, what? No, we would rather have some other director. And actually, if there is another director that you guys think would make a better Star Wars film, leave it in the comments section below. Let us know what you think about Taika doing it, but also let us know maybe some other directors that you might think, would make a really good Star Wars movie. All right, what do we got next?
All right, next. So, the director's chair. Okay. So, what would you have as your conclusion to the Star Wars saga if you were the director/writer?
Oh, I'm doing both?
Either or both if you want.
Hey, JJ co-wrote he co-wrote Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker.
True.
So, and directed it. So, yeah, I guess that's conceivable. I don't know. So when we're saying have it end, are you talking about like I'm making Rise of Skywalker, or are you talking about...
Yeah, the Rise of Skywalker.
Okay, so the whole thing is I have Force Awakens, I have The Last Jedi.
Yep, that's already taken place.
And now I have to...
Eric Vance has now been named as director and writer of Rise of Skywalker.
I hate to say, I'm gonna take the John Campea route on this one. That, I don't know, because here's what Campea had said when that question was posed to him. Because, he does a lot of like the live chat stuff on his show, so it's kind of like, he's just reading the question. And you could tell he's not even pre-reading the questions. He's just like literally reading them as he's doing it.
Right.
And somebody actually asked him that very same question.
No.
And I thought he was going to go.
It wasn't me, by the way.
I thought he was going to go and, give this whole like dissertation about it. But what he said actually makes sense. And, when I thought about it, I was like, that's actually where I stand with it, is that it would be difficult to me you would almost have to sit there and like, take a month or something to figure it out and really flesh something out. But since this is not the John Campea show, I'll take a quick, like maybe overview stab at it.
Okay.
I don't think I would have I think I would have kept it to where they did go on an adventure together. I could cheese out and just say, well, I just would have done what JJ did.
It wouldn't be bad. I mean, if that's how you really felt.
No, I think honestly what I would have done is brought Plagueis back. And I probably would have had Rey be more of a descendant of Plagueis. Because bringing Palpatine back makes sense because he's pretty much the villain of the whole saga. The way they brought him back was a little bit too rushed, I thought. I didn't have a problem with them coming back, and I didn't even have a problem with them not explaining it. Of course, we talked about all this. I mean, if you guys really want to know, what we thought about the Rise of Skywalker, just go back to our spoiler review.
Yeah.
And, you'll get plenty. But the thing is that, the whole thing where he kind of announces it and, everybody's like, oh, okay. It was almost like it was too matter of fact. And then, like I said before, nobody really knew who a Jedi was, but all of a sudden everybody knew, oh, it was a Sith. It's kind of like, well, how do you know? There's only like 2 or 3 of them, or 4 really, during the entire thing. How on earth do you know when there's like thousands of Jedi running around?
Yes, Guardians of the Peace.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed inconceivable to me that, that was a little strange. But I probably would have had Plagueis had some master plan. And then they, of course, had to get together and thwart him. The other thing that I thought could have been interesting if they didn't want to use any of that stuff is you could have brought the Yuuzhan Vong in at that point. Some people would criticize that because to bring in a brand new villain, would have been bad. Which is why I might have stuck more with the Plagueis thing, because that's been referenced. And it would also give reason for, say, the First Order and the Resistance to work together to fight this new threat.
Okay.
Offhand. Because honestly, I don't really know. That's something that I would really have to put a lot of thought into.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a big undertaking, no question.
Well, here's the thing, and this is something that we've always said, it's kind of like you can't... There's no way, no matter what you did, there would have been a segment of the fan base that would have been unhappy.
Oh, yeah, of course.
You can't...
Because everybody thinks their version is better.
Well, and it's not only that, but as you got The Force Awakens and then The Last Jedi, it was almost like the whole disjointed, this wasn't, thought through. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons why I applaud JJ and The Rise of Skywalker so much, is that they actually gave us a good, fun movie that tied it up pretty well. Especially when you consider the fact that there was no plan whatsoever for this trilogy. And a lot of people really did like it, me included, so...
Yeah.
I don't know. But with me yammering on and on, I'm sure you've had some time to mull it over. But you have the unfair advantage. You come up with our outlines.
Oh. Well, I think for me... I would definitely do the kind of overview types thing. I would have made Rey a Palpatine still, but I wouldn't have had Palpatine in the movie. I would have had strictly Kylo. I mean, Palpatine he would have made an appearance, but only as like a hologram or a holocron type of thing. I would have had a situation where, okay, he feels, because he's connected to Rey, he feels Rey growing stronger in the Force and of course in the light side. And so he feels like, okay, I need to become stronger if I'm going to defeat her or turn her. And so then he goes to look for these holocrons. He finds one from Palpatine. He discovers the secret that, like, oh, Rey is a Palpatine. He wants to use that against her to kind of like turn her. So, of course, they kind of have an encounter. He tells her about it, and she's kind of has that Luke moment, like, no, that's not true. That can't be, but then she goes to Leia, and Leia kind of really mothers her in that situation and kind of like, look, Luke and I came from Vader, but you don't have to be that. You can be more. And she kind of like shows her the light side, kind of really, and she kind of shows or kind of completes Luke's training with her, but more so on the emotional side of things. To kind of give her, because this is how you're tempted. This is how Kylo got tempted. And so then I would just have Kylo studying Sith stuff. He's growing stronger. And it's kind of like this whole, all right, now everything's got to come to a head. And I would have a situation where Luke possibly coming back from the Force, but he can't stay long. It's like he's actually an embodiment.
Yeah, I was going to say, the fact that they actually killed him off at the end of The Last Jedi really complicated things, because a lot of things that I would want to do with 9 would have involved him still being alive. Now, he may have ended up sacrificing himself in 9, but it would have been a 9, not 8.
Not 8, you're right. But I would have had Luke, like, there would have been a situation where the Knights of Ren kind of like trapped Rey in a situation where she wasn't strong enough yet to get out of it. And then Luke kind of had to come up, so look, this is our last time, because at this point I have to stay with the Force in a situation like that.
Yeah, and a similar thing was actually done in the Heir to the Empire novel. That's what it was called, right?
Well, there with the book, yes.
Okay.
I don't know if that would happen in that one, but I know the book is definitely Heir to the Empire.
Well, sorry guys.
It's been a while.
I got that nasty headache I'm fighting off right now. So it's like my thinking is a little... Anytime I get like a really bad sinus headache, it kind of scrambles my thinking. So, if you guys see anything like, me losing train of thought, or maybe a graphic light switches late or something like that. Just, literally charge it to my head, not to my heart, right? All right.
Nice.
Bad puns don't have to be part of this. Heir of the Empire. I think that's the Timothy Zahn novel.
Yes.
Okay. In the very beginning of it, Obi-Wan comes to Luke and says, okay, you've done basically what you need to do. So my time is limited. It was almost like him keep coming back as a Force ghost. It was like he couldn't sustain that. Mm-hmm. He was able to do that to bring him to that point, but it's like, okay, from here on out, you're on your own. And that was a really poignant moment, I thought, in the novel. As number one, and of course, that's one of the things that obviously Disney did away with. I mean, in a way, Lucas himself sort of did away with that anyway. Because remember, that book actually came out before the prequels.
Yes. Yep.
So, his whole thing is, no, Qui-Gon actually learned how to do it first, and it was an actual technique, and, it doesn't have a time limit. But I always thought that the time limit thing was really interesting. Mm-hmm. That, you can come back if you need to, but you can't just keep doing it, infinitely. So, yeah, I like that idea.
You kind of have to pick and choose when you have to.
Right, because, okay, if Luke does this, like, listen, I can come back, and maybe because he's so strong, he can almost come back in a physical form.
Yeah, and that's why I was going to have it, like, come back in a physical form, much like Yoda did, and just be able to affect the present. Just, okay, I can save you here, but it's like, okay, I can only really do this up until this point, but...
Well, and me, I'm a big fan of the current... you bring up that Yoda had a lot of physical properties as a Force ghost. Mm-hmm. And even Luke, Luke catches a lightsaber.
Yep.
And he's obviously interacting with things around him. Mm-hmm. So I thought, I kind of like this whole Neo Force ghost thing that they got going on.
Well, especially for people who are like grandmasters. It's kind of like, you expect them to be able to do kind of more than Obi-Wan.
Sure.
Because Obi-Wan's just a master, much like Qui-Gon was.
But you know what? I don't even think it's so much that, although because that happens to coincidentally also be the case, who knows? Mm-hmm. I think it's because as time progressed, that power's been around longer. When you think about it, Obi-Wan was like the first, second. Because, Qui-Gon showed Yoda, and then Yoda was all like, oh, more,
more
for you I have to,
yeah, more lessons I have for you or something
exactly, something like that. So it's kind of like, when Obi-Wan learned it, and Qui-Gon obviously appeared to him, it's like, this is like a brand new thing. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't that long that, he actually had to use it, which kind of made me go, you better hope you really learned it well, because you only get one shot at this.
Right.
But the thing is that, okay, by the time, of Luke's time to do it, mm-hmm. The power's been around for a while. Everybody's kind of studied, maybe a holocron or two, and,
mm-hmm.
Who knows?
Yeah, the text.
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly that's that's an appealing concept, I think. Where it's kind of like, okay, he has a certain amount of time he can come back. Mm-hmm. That works.
Yep. And then, of course, at the end of it all, like, Kylo would never be redeemed. I think it's one of those things in a situation where he kind of sees his errors, but I want him to see his errors and realize, like, yeah, I really did screw up, but... Much like Vader, like, it's too late for me.
He started to go in that direction. Mm-hmm. It was his little Han Solo vision that right. kind of brought it home. But he was kind of like, when he was telling Rey, and Rey was kind of like, once again, like, come back or whatever. And he was kind of saying, like, I've done too much. I'm too mm-hmm. far gone. It's not that I don't want to. It's just I don't think I can at this point.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to change my answer.
Okay.
Because I remember now what it was that I had said a couple of years ago, what I would want to see. It was one of those things where we were talking about what we would want to see. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, if you were in charge of 9, what would you do? So what I would do is I would have had it to where Rey went dark and then Kylo went light. Because at first I was the same way. I didn't want Kylo redeemed, but I thought, well... What would be interesting is if Kylo went back to the light side, but Rey was tempted by the dark side. Now, at first I thought it would be Snoke, but now you could bring Palpatine back in this And her being a granddaughter thing would make it even more so compelling, I think, because now you have Palpatine coming back, which, of course, I would have brought him back in a way different way. Mm-hmm. Still would have brought him back, but it would have been a little bit more organic and not so, oh, he made an announcement. Hey, I'm back. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, you. Okay, cool.
Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't have done that. But I would have had him come back. He would have ultimately... And maybe it could have been this thing almost like how Anakin was. Because if you remember, Anakin went to the dark side because he thought he was doing something good.
Right.
He gave himself up to the dark side because he thought ultimately he was helping the galaxy. Mm-hmm. So if Palpatine somehow maneuvered Rey the same way he maneuvered Anakin and convinced her, like, by doing this, you're actually helping everybody, that would be, a compelling reason for her to do it and believable. In the meantime, Kylo starts to realize that this just isn't working, and some things happen that he eventually turns to the light, and now a light side Kylo and a dark side Rey have to face off. And that's something that hasn't really ever been done in Star Wars before.
Well, cool. I guess I think that kind of leads almost into our next one, though.
Does it?
A little bit.
All right, go for it.
So Star Wars needs to reinvent itself. How?
Yeah. That's the big billion maybe dollar question. Because the problem is that, and this is the issue with the sequel trilogy in general, is that it breaks some new ground. Mm-hmm. The problem is the core fans didn't like it, but then they decided, okay, we'll do some callbacks and maybe hit, I don't want to say recycle ideas, but hit some of the same story beats. Problem is, maybe it was a little too familiar. And so you basically have this thing of too hot or too cold. You don't have it just right in this case, at least according to the fan base at large. Because if you think about it, even the people that whined about, how derivative The Force Awakens was, pretty much everybody universally likes the movie. Mm-hmm. Most people. Mm-hmm. Yes, you have the whole Disney ruined my childhood guys running around, but
right.
For the most part, people are like, you know what? I was good with The Force Awakens, and then of course you have the Last Jedi haters. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like that was the too hot. It's like, okay, you went too far. And even then, the two biggest complaints about that are Canto Bight was unnecessary and poorly executed, and then of course Luke dying. Mm-hmm. And he was grumpy.
Yeah.
He basically was playing Harrison Ford. Because, and I think that if you had chosen one, if you had either made him the Luke Skywalker we all...
I'm sorry.
Well, if you had made him the Luke Skywalker that we all know and love, but then he dies at the end in a self-sacrifice like he did, okay. Or... if you make him grumpy, but then he kind of turns back and then does the whole heroic kind of actually like if you just did what happened, but made it to where he defeated, everybody, like he just wipes his hand and all the AT-ATs go flying or something. Mm-hmm. He ignites his lightsaber. He takes on Kylo. Maybe he doesn't kill him because Luke, wants to redeem him, but Kylo just flees, like pulls a Dooku or a Grievous or something. Mm-hmm. And just bails before the battle's over. I think that might have been it. So I say all this to say that what they really need to do is they need to take new stories. And by new, I don't necessarily mean like brand new. Mm-hmm. I said before, I think in the aftermath, I think the last episode, the aftermath, because we kind of touched on this even in that episode. They could make a 10, 11, and 12... like a new saga, mm-hmm. and they could take one of two things. They can do the whole Timothy Zahn trilogy that Zahn had actually written for 7, 8, 9, Heir to the Empire, Last Command, and Dark Force Rising. They could do that storyline, but replace the original characters with Rey, Finn, and Poe. It would still work. You could still introduce people like Talon Card, Mara Jade, all these people. You could do minor tweaks to the storyline because you have slightly different characters. You could even have, like, you know, Chewbacca and Lando and all those guys still in it. You could take that basic storyline, get Thrawn in there. Okay, now, granted, canon-wise, he was around in the prequels almost. But you can be like, hey, nobody knows how long the Chiss live.
Exactly.
He could just pop up like, hey, guess what? Now I'm back. Right? And you could actually do those. Or you could do the Yuuzhan Vong story. Rey would now take Luke's place in that story. And, you know, Poe and Finn and all those guys. You could actually do that, condense it. And that would actually introduce, even though you would have familiar characters, that would introduce that. The other thing, of course, is the Old Republic. You can go into the whole Old Republic thing. Now there's rumors of a High Republic era.
Right.
Which is like 400 years before, I think, the prequels.
Yeah.
So it's kind of in between the Old Republic and the, you know, and what we know of.
The Republic, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing for Star Wars, I think they're trying to, well, if you're going to reinvent something, I think that you need to kind of start with something fresh. And I think it's something like, we don't need to see the whole, you know, boy gazing at the stars, wishing that he could be more, you know, I mean, we've done
the hero's journey.
The hero's journey. Like we've covered that.
Yeah.
You know, now I think that, you know, with the advent of The Mandalorian, and it shows that you can do a storyline that's based in a time period where you don't have any of the familiar characters.
Well, what's interesting to me about The Mandalorian, that you bring this up, is the fact that it's very much in a time period where the original characters are kind of in their prime, yet it features none of them.
Exactly, and that's my point. So, and the thing is, it's like up until, like I said, really until The Mandalorian and the sequel trilogy, you know, everything about Star Wars has been something we know. Versus, I mean, like, of course, when the original trilogy came out, of course, no one knew what that was until that happened. But like, okay, then you go to the prequels. Okay, we know how that has to end. It's just, how do we get there? You do Rogue One. We know that story already. Just how do we get to that? How do we show how many Bothans died to bring us this information type of situation? So, you know, it's just like, all right, you know, so we know how these things have come to pass. So when you look at something where you have this, like the sequels, now you're trying to go into a different direction or a newer direction, but you're still trying to hold on to the old trilogy.
Yeah, there's a lot of callbacks to it.
And I think that's where they kind of
No, I agree. They need to
and I think that's what needs to happen.
The reset button, basically.
Yeah, you need to just come up with, like, I would think of something like the best way for me to describe it is almost like kind of like an Aladdin Star Wars, where you have like a kid or somebody who's kind of like a criminal who has the Force, and then he's taught, like, no, you know, but he's using it to survive, or he's using it for like more of a nefarious things because there's no one to really teach him anything. He's just kind of out there with these abilities and like, well, cool, I can kind of pickpocket from these people, and I can kind of, you know, run away from the law by, you know, force jumping. And until somebody who runs into him is like, hey, no, you don't. Almost kind of like Ezra. You know, it's kind of how Ezra was a little bit, just kind of trying to survive.
Well, and listening to you talk about all this stuff, it really gets me to think that maybe what they need to do is just not do trilogies for a while.
Yeah.
Not do another saga. Do some standalone movies.
And that might
show us this universe. And then once something kind of catches, like maybe a movie comes out and everybody like latches on, like, oh, this is the best thing since Empire Strikes Back. Okay, make a saga based on that story.
Yeah. I agree. Or like I say, you could do the book thing. And like I said, you can show different aspects. So like we've always said that Bloodline would have been a great movie.
Sure.
Aftermath trilogy.
I was just talking about this on not too long ago on the Facebook, what's that group I'm part of? Like My Star Wars Life, I think it's called, or whatever. there's a lot of vocal people on that. And I brought up that, you could do either some of the new canon books, or you could take from the EU and just swap out some characters. You could do a book on iJedi. That was a great, and that had like no original trilogy characters or anything in it. In fact, it was a completely different, like it had nobody familiar. I don't remember anybody that we knew. It was all brand new characters, and it's one of the best EU books. If you guys haven't had a chance to read that, yes, it's part of the Legend series now, so it's not official, but it's still a great book. The Darth Bane. Now, granted, that would probably make a better Disney Plus series at this point, but I mean, it's on the table. They could do movies on it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can do to reinvent. And I think what we need to do is just kind of figure out, okay, what time period and what world are we in? And then...
Well, they need to plan it.
And whatever they do, of course, we know they have to.
It's like, could we just get everybody involved and plan it? I mean, if you're doing standalone movies, what they need to do is I would almost do the Marvel thing, do a bunch of standalones. You don't necessarily have to make like a Star Wars version of the Avengers or anything like that, but
right.
I mean, have a direction for even the standalone films. Have some sort of a direction, some sort of a thing where maybe everything culminates into a different, some sort of a thing. It doesn't have to be like, okay, all the people in the standalone movies get together and
in one movie, then now we're gonna fight.
But like a perfect example was some of the things that were rumored in the Benioff and Weiss trilogy that was going to be made. The idea was, I think it was like one movie was going to be kind of about how the Jedi rise, and then how the Sith rise, and then
the big war that happens.
Yeah, the big war that happens. Or it was like between them and like Rian Johnson, they were going to like all handle like different elements, but then there'd be a movie that brought it all together. You could do something like that too. Yeah,
also you can take like something I've just seen on television that's been cool. Is like they'll take the event of one day or something, but they show it from the perspective of the other side, how they view it. So like,
even like Lion King 1.5. Remember that?
Exactly. Like that was awesome. So yeah, and you can do something like that. Excuse me. So like to your point of the Jedi
like Lost
and the
Stars.
Sith. Yeah, and it's just like, okay, well, you have the Jedi. This is how they're viewing, and you see things from their perspective. And everyone's like, yeah, but then the Sith is kind of like, okay, you can kind of see why they're taking the stance of, and everything is not really evil, but then you kind of have somebody in the background who really is truly evil, who's kind of pushing this initiative and kind of riling everybody up to the point where it kind of culminates to that. So yeah, that would be cool.
Can you get like some Sith version of Jafar or something? But yeah, I mean, they could do, and that's the thing, they could do so many things. But I think that the fans, because everybody's like, well, what do the fans want? Don't worry about what the fans want.
The fans don't know. That's the thing.
Just give us a good story.
Yeah.
And execute it well. That's all the fans really want.
True.
I mean, yes, everybody's going to have their little dream about, I really want, this to happen, that to happen. Look, Lucas never worried about the fans.
Well, yeah, I think it was just because he was just trying to tell his story. And
exactly.
That was it.
And that's the reason why
we fell in love with it.
And love it or hate it, because there's a lot of people that hated the prequels. But you know what? The one thing that everybody will admit to is, hey, at least there was something there. There was a story.
Yeah.
And it was cohesive. So just give us a cohesive story. But what about you guys? Where do you guys think Star Wars should go next? Everybody's always whining about Star Wars and, what they've done and how this is terrible and that's terrible. Here's your chance. Leave in the comments section below. I mean, not like Lucasfilm is actually reading any of this, but we want to know. What do you guys think? Leave it in the comments section. And while you're there, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out whenever we have a new video up. Love to chat with you guys. All right, well, I guess we should probably take off and...
Yeah.
I saw you taking your last drink. I still got mine, but...
Well, I got one to go, just in case.
Got one to go. That's good. All right, well, what do we got next?
Next, we have Duel of the Fates. All right. So this week, which original trilogy character had the most impactful death in the sequels? Han, Luke, or Leia?
for me, that's a hands down easy one, Han Solo.
I know you're going there.
And it's not because he's my favorite character either.
Yes, it is.
No, it really isn't. This time it isn't. It's because, okay, all Leia really did was
just lay down and die.
Well, I mean, first of all, you could argue hers is the most compelling death because the actual actress died.
Well, yeah, that's true.
But if we're sticking in universe and character,
she wins by default.
I mean, the only thing that she really did was she just was like, yeah, I got to go lie down because, you know, this is going to take a lot out of me. And then she just vanishes. Mm-hmm. You know, there wasn't really, I mean, granted, you could say that she was sacrificing to use every bit of her energy to bring Kylo back to the light. Okay. Same thing with Luke. You could say, well, he was doing everything that, you know, he could, using every last bit of energy he had as a self-sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I could understand that. But when you really look at the on-screen depictions of this stuff, you know, Han Solo goes back. He could have escaped. They had planted the detonators. They had done what they needed to do. They could have just all left and blew everything up and then taken everything on. But he knew that his son was there, and he wanted just one more time to try to reach him. And then you have this whole little dialogue thing going back and forth. And then, you know, Kylo kind of does what he does and tricks him into thinking that, well, you know what, he's thinking about it. And then he puts a lightsaber through his own dad's chest. Mm-hmm. And then in the last thing, you know, Han's kind of like, you know, stroking his face or whatever, and then falls to his death. I mean, there was impact there, because it's also the first time that we saw real raw emotion from him. Mm-hmm. You know, he was desperate to save his kid, and he was willing to risk his own life to do it. So that's why I would say his is really the most impactful. Now, of course, you can make the argument that Luke saved what was left essentially of the Resistance. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, it depends on too what you mean by impactful. It's like, do you mean what like pulled the heartstrings the most, or what made the most difference in the grand scheme of things? Because then you'd have to go with Luke, because if Luke didn't intervene, there would have been no more Resistance.
No, I mean, I think I was more so focused on the emotional side.
Yeah, like exactly, and that's what I thought you were talking about. So that's why I would have to go with Han.
I'm going with Luke.
Wow. Well, I mean, hey.
Duel of the Fates, man.
It is a duel of the Fates.
I'm going with Luke because I think his death was impactful simply because, one, you know, you kind of see a guy who literally fell from grace. You know, you actually get to see somebody, because we all heard, of course, how like Obi-Wan felt like, you know, right, you know, he kind of did the whole con thing with Luke. Oh yeah, this guy betrayed and murdered your father, but like really, like you lost your pupil, really. And you know, we never really saw how that truly impacted Obi-Wan, but like I think with Luke, we actually got a chance to see how you go from being like literally the most powerful person almost in the galaxy, and then now you're kind of reduced to just like wanting to die because of that power. It's because, you know, you hear him say, it's like, oh, because I was Luke Skywalker, Jedi, man. Like he's like, oh, because I was this great hero. And it's like, it's not everything that it's cracked up to be. Mm-hmm. And it really did start to show the light of what Jedi really go through and the emotions that they can have. And of course, just watching even how Yoda had to kind of reach back to him, like, you know, yeah, failure, like that's the most important one. Like you have to accept and teach your students about failure, because you're going to have it. Just because you have this power doesn't mean you can just do anything or you can stop everything. You have to accept certain failures in life. And then you get to the point where it's like, okay, he even cut himself off from the Force. He cut himself off from his sister, who, you know, it's like that's the only family he has left, you know, so he doesn't have any kids. He doesn't have a wife. Mom and dad are both dead. So it's like he even left his sister out there to hang. And so to that point, and then of course, no one really expected Luke to die. That was the other thing too. You thought he was going to return. And when you saw him like doing this whole force projection thing, you're like, we're all in the theater like, yeah, like, all right, he didn't show up with a lightsaber, but this is almost equally as cool. And you're thinking
what
like,
you were
okay,
hoping was going to happen was, he'd just like sort of float back down
and
then
just kind of take a breath and like, whew, that was a lot.
Yeah.
You're not expecting him to like, wait, did he? I remember looking at you and like, wait, did he die? Like,
yeah, I mean, I thought the same thing. I'm like, okay, did he just disappear? Like, what? Okay, what was that? But then, and you're kind of like, oh man, that's kind of like a Yoda-like thing. He didn't actually just die, did he? And
like he wasn't. Like we weren't ready. Like as fans, we weren't ready to let him go yet. It was just like Yoda. You could kind of understand because, like, all right, you had some time with him in Empire, and he only came in for really a small chunk of Empire. But it was impactful. Mention the fact
he was like 900 years old.
Exactly. I mean, so you kind of
different than like when a 90-year-old passes. It's kind of like, well, okay, you're still sad, but at the same time, I mean, at 90 years old, you're just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna go take a nap, and hey, if I wake up, maybe I'll watch TV later. I mean, it's kind of one of those things like you're just
waiting.
Yeah, you're just waiting at that point. Whereas if you're like 60. It's a little tragic.
Exactly. And so I think that's kind of why I would say Luke would be more impactful. His death was, and of course, yes, him saving what was left of the 8 people in the Resistance, but, it's still like, and the fact that how he kind of came back and just, he realized himself like, all right, I can't be this way. Like, I must do what must be done.
And if you want to tie it into like his whole redemption, but you could make the same argument with Han, because don't forget, he had gone off to be a smuggler basically. Then he finds the Falcon finally, because that's what he was looking for, and then he ends up getting. It was really almost like once again, it's another way it mirrors 4, where he's kind of on his own thing, but then he gets pulled back into this battle and realizes that he ends up not only sacrificing for his son, but he's sacrificing for, the people that he had cared about too. So, yeah, I mean, I think we both agree that Leia's death wasn't really on the table for this, but.
Well, she was, but never mind. Forget it.
I mean, it's sad that, right? It's sad that, unfortunately, that Carrie Fisher herself passed away.
That
and
sucks.
Honestly, I don't think that she would have been killed off. That's another,
that's a good question.
That could have actually been, it could be another Cantina question or topic for all I know, but it's like, would they have killed off Leia if Carrie Fisher had lived and done 9? So, well, what about you guys? What do you think? Do you think that Luke Skywalker had the most impactful death, as Daryl seems to believe? Or, are you on the side of logic and reason? No, I'm just kidding. and agree with me that Han Solo, who obviously had the most impactful death, had the most impactful death.
You're about to have the most impactful death.
Well, I definitely say that if you did that while we're on the air, it would definitely get the most views.
Well, strengthen your point.
Hey, I mean, take one for the team, sacrifice, right? But just let us know in the comments section below. And like I said, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you guys can see more of our really good videos. All right.
All right.
What's the time?
So it is time for a certain point of view.
And what's a certain point of view, Daryl?
I'll tell you. No, a certain point of view is our featured topic. This is where we kind of get to the meat of the matter of the show. And
the title of the show that we always announce at the beginning? This is where we talk about it.
This is it. So, the Colin Trevorrow script.
Isn't that weird how that leaked all of a sudden?
Man, but you know what? We always ask, like, I wonder what it was.
And you caught the title of the movie, right?
Yes, Duel of the Fates.
Is that not the weirdest thing?
Yeah, I was just like, wow.
Like, I mean, we would almost had to rethink our whole segment. That was the first thing that popped out at me when I read this.
I was like, whoa, that's wow. Crazy.
But you know what? I like that title.
I was about to say I liked it, though.
I really like it. I don't know. Here's the thing. I think that Duel of the Fates would have been a better title for The Last Jedi. Not necessarily the content of the movie, but I'm just thinking in terms of like a middle movie. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's really necessarily a concluding saga title, but I guess it could be because, Duel of the Fates implies like a big thing or something.
At the end,
but
it's like, okay, which fate is really going to survive?
Exactly. But oh man, was there a lot of juicy stuff in there.
Yes, man, this is awesome.
Okay, so first I have to actually ask this then. Rise of Skywalker or Duel of the Fates?
As far as title?
No, I mean as far as the content.
Oh, the content. Okay, I thought you were just going mess on the title. The content. I don't know because there's certain parts of it.
Well, see, that was going to be my answer. My answer would be a combination of the two.
Yeah, it'll be definitely a combination.
Certain parts of the things where I was like, ooh, I wish they had done that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that would have been cool.
Yeah.
But then there's other things where I kind of read it and was like, yeah, you know what? Kind of glad that we got the Rise of Skywalker and JJ was at the helm. Because I don't know if that movie had been... I mean, obviously from, a script or whatever, it would have looked different on the screen. And I'm sure there would have been all kinds of like, Kathleen would have been like, no, you can't do this or whatever.
Well, I mean, I think the other thing too is just like, that's the hard part because on one hand, not taking anything away from Colin, but I just think visually, like JJ just comes up with better shots and just...
Oh, I
think he just
I think there's no question about it. But on the other hand, and this is where the comparison's a little unfair, we saw the Rise of Skywalker. We're only reading the
That's true.
Duel of the Fates. So, I mean...
That's true.
On the other hand, though, I could read Heir of the Empire and be like, dude, I wish this had been Force Awakens. So, I mean, I guess it's 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. Yeah,
but I think I'm just looking at Colin Trevorrow's, like, the movies that he's done, like Jurassic,
Right.
So Jurassic Park, I just found, like, even if I had to compare, like, his shooting style to JJ's Star Trek, the saying, even though I know they're two completely different.
No, that's a good comparison because both of them, in a way, are actually trying to stay true to the franchise.
Exactly, and that's where I was going, right? But I think JJ just did a better job with Star Trek than Colin did, and everybody's pretty much said that they like Colin Trevorrow's Jurassic Park, but it still had some moments where they were just like, and I can understand that. But JJ, like, I mean, he really made you feel like you're back in Star Trek again. So that's why I would say on that tip, I would give it to JJ. But I like the writing of Trevorrow. Trevorrow had a lot of great ideas in his script, such as one of the things I think that really stood out to me was that he didn't want Kylo redeemed. He actually kept him evil. So that was awesome. The fact that kind of how he was trying to come after Rey, I thought that was kind of a creative.
Like I said, there was a lot of really cool differences.
And I don't know if you all had a chance to read this, but yeah, definitely check out. It's been all over, the internet. Colin Trevorrow's.
Yeah, and I'll put a link to it.
Okay,
in the description.
His script for episode 9, his version was called Duel of the Fates. I don't know. It's just like you said. There's differences between the two, definitely. But then there are some things that you kind of wish that Colin actually, it's almost like you wanted Colin to write it, but then JJ to shoot. That's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, and that could have been something too. Yeah, maybe like incorporating some of it because, I wish I really was more clear on what parts of Rise of Skywalker were suggested by George Lucas. I forgot they had mentioned like 1 or 2 scenes that they're pretty sure Lucas had a direct hand in suggesting.
But see, then this brings up the other question. I just thought about it because there's still this mystery JJ cut. So like, I wonder like JJ's real version versus Colin's now, because now would that have been closer to?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, just judging by, because of course we didn't get a Palpatine in the Colin Trevorrow version either. So,
well, true.
We had that other guy.
Yeah. Well, so now his whole story was actually cool. So Colin Trevorrow basically he didn't do the Palpatine in a sense of a live breathing Palpatine. It was basically Kylo found this holocron and Palpatine. It was basically a holocron that Palpatine made for Vader. and for Vader to go train with this other Tor something. I can't remember his last, but I know his first name is like Tor, but he's like this big hulking like alien type person, and he's supposed to actually kind of combat him. And so of course Kylo takes it, finds him, and he goes off and tries to combat and beat him. And so then now you have this whole thing. Now he has to try to meet Rey, and he's trying to turn her to the dark side. And it's this whole thing. And it's like, okay, you know what? To me, that's cool.
Yeah, and I think that it would have. And of course, if I remember correctly, in Trevorrow's script, Rey's parents were indeed still nobodies. But it turned out, weren't they trying to kill her or something?
They had it where Kylo killed her parents.
That's what it was. On Snoke's orders.
On Snoke's orders.
And then he realized that and was kind of...
And he was kind of using that almost as bait.
As bait, yeah.
To get Rey to come to the dark side.
Yeah.
So once again, like that whole bait...
That was definitely more original.
Yeah.
It was definitely a more original thing. I mean, even though a lot of the fan service callbacks and everything that JJ put in there tugged at the heartstrings, don't know if it was the best thing to serve the story. On the other hand, I do think that if he was going to give us something, that would be like callbacks and stuff like that to all the other movies or whatever, I thought he did it in a very tasteful, good way that didn't irritate me too bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what did you... Okay, so these are the things that we liked about Trevorrow's thing. What are some things that you didn't like about the script?
I mean, there was just it was kind of like, in some ways it was the feel, it was the way they were describing, some of the scenes and everything. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of the elements. Again, I almost wish it was like a full-blown script so you could really compare the two, but I like a lot of the elements that JJ was putting in there as far as, the whole team's together on an adventure. You had a lot of the great, like the C-3PO stuff was just amazing, and there was, and that's the thing, because even the people that hated Rise of Skywalker will all say that there was a lot of really good moments in it. Mm-hmm. It was just that, they felt the film was too rushed, and they thought it was a little too fan servicey. There were just some other things that they didn't like about it. But ultimately, everybody's like, well, there are things to like about it. Definitely. The humor, I thought, was spot on in it. And I don't get that feeling from the Trevorrow version. But I could be wrong, because again,
like you said, we don't have
we're reading a description.
Yeah, it's not the whole script. And
there were a few other things here and there that definitely made me go, I'm kind of glad that JJ won out on that one. But I have to say, I was really compelled by, I actually liked the Trevorrow version better than I thought I would. And I remember, it was like 1 or 2 podcasts ago or something like that. I remember you and I were saying, like, man, I wonder what the Trevorrow version would have been.
Yeah, like. Exactly. That's what I was saying. We always talk about
kind of like the Lord and Miller version of Solo. It's like, what would that have been like?
And then now you kind of get it. You
kind of get it.
At least a little bit.
Enough that you can visualize it in your head, and of course the danger of that is you romanticize it. Because obviously you're picturing it the way that you would do it, and you're in how you would envision it, and so naturally you're making it really cool. Or maybe if Trevorrow had actually made it, you would have been like, well, it was a good idea, but it was executed badly.
I was just going to say, it still boils down to the execution of it all.
Yeah, it's the execution of it all. I mean, you never really know.
And I don't think he had Leia die in this one either.
Well,
I know he was training Rey. She was training Rey.
If I remember correctly, though, because remember, Trevorrow was involved before even Rogue One, before, I was going to say Leia, before Carrie Fisher died.
Yeah, definitely.
So his version actually had a living Carrie Fisher, so he was able to, flesh that out. Now, what would have been interesting is what would his version have been like, because this is another thing, too, that JJ had. I don't really want to call it a luxury because it sounds tasteless, but she had already passed when JJ got the job. I could be wrong. I'd have to check the timeline on that, but I'm pretty sure that he was announced as a director and writer after she had passed. And if that was the case, because she had completed her scenes for 8, I remember everybody was like saying, "Oh, don't worry about it." She completed her scenes because remember she died like maybe less than a month after, like a few weeks actually after Rogue One came out.
Yeah,
because I remember she had in one of her final tweets she had actually seen Rogue One, and I remember thinking like, "Wow, that was close," because Rogue One came out like I don't know 15, 16 somewhere in there. She had seen it, like 2 or 3 days after that,
and then right after Christmas.
Yeah, she passed basically like right. I think it's like the date, like Christmas Eve or something. Or no, it was like the 20th or 21st because we were still working at the school, and it was the last day of winter or Christmas break. Like we were about to go on break that night.
We went to that meeting together.
We went to yeah, but that was when she actually had died,
right?
And told us like, "Oh, Princess Leia died," and we're like, "What?" But I'm talking about when we found out she had the heart attack.
It was that Friday. Right,
it was
that's correct.
Friday that we were getting out, and it was like I don't even remember why we were there. We were catching up on something or whatever, and it was kind of like I happened to go on IMDb or something. I was like, "Dude, Carrie Fisher had a heart attack," and you're like, "What?"
Oh yeah,
we
were finishing up the concerts. That's what it was.
Yeah, that's what it was. So I was like, oh, man, well, okay, hopefully she pulls through. And it was like she didn't. It looked like she was going to, but she didn't.
Yeah.
So, Trevorrow had at least in his mind a script that would have included a very much living Carrie Fisher to actually shoot a lot of, all the Leia scenes, whereas JJ didn't have that. So he had to work around that, which was difficult because it was teed up to be Leia, being the front and center character of that film.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was tough.
Yeah, but I guess we'll never know really what it will be. I mean, I hope they do actually release it or he releases it or something like, hey, this without.
You know what I kind of wish they would do? I mean, this is a pipe dream, and I realize that, so don't everybody go crazy in the comment section. But what I wish they would do, almost because they have all these like alternate universe things going out, is either do a comic series or an animated movie. So give us like a comic series or an animated version of the Trevorrow script or the Lord Miller script.
I would actually just, even if they can't do that, I would just love for someone to like sit him down like in like one of those chairs and just interview him about like,
oh sure, that too,
and just have him tell his story. Like this is what it would have been had I'd still been on to do it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, what do you guys think? We always ask that after each one of these segments. Did you guys, for those of you guys who have actually read or seen the article or whatever, do you wish Trevorrow had been able to make the movie? Or were you breathing a sigh of relief that JJ actually made the movie? Or were you a little bit more in our camp where it's kind of like you almost wish it had been a combination of both? Let us know in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. All right, I believe it is time for one of my favorite segments.
Yes, sir.
All right, well, this is a segment where we answer your questions that you have submitted to us, and it's a segment that we call Clear Your Mind. That's right. You submit them, we answer them. Who do we got first?
First question comes from Sania Richards. Sania asks, so because Rey and Kylo are connected in the Force, does that mean that they are related somehow? Were they connected from birth or from Snoke?
Well, I think Snoke made it pretty clear that he's the one that established the connection.
Well, he established the connection in the Force as far as their minds are concerned, but I think she might be asking like, because you remember Kylo said they formed this dyad.
Well,
in the Force, so it's like,
and that's what I was about to say. I mean, it's like, okay, he's a Skywalker and she's a Palpatine, so it's kind of like there's bound to be some connection in there because those two families seem to be inexorably combined.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's always that whole thing of Palpatine created Anakin, if that was still true. You know what I'm saying? So if you really kind of look at it by her being a Palpatine. And
here's the thing, too, right? Because he created Snoke, it's kind of like, okay, was Palpatine really the one making this connection? And
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we could definitely...
So are they actually, like, related, like Force brothers and sisters, or are they... I get her question, like...
Well, I think the answer is that they're definitely connected. I don't necessarily think that they're family.
Okay.
It's almost kind of like how if you have two families that are friends and they go way back. I mean, the kids are, I'm sure that, if Palpatine had been around, Kylo would have been like, "Hey, Uncle Sheev, how's it going?" I mean, they're just like, they're connected in that.
You and the Barnes family. Almost.
Yeah, right, exactly. They're connected in a way of not necessarily like really related, but there's definitely a connection in the Force, and then of course there's that yin and yang kind of a thing too, where one's dark, one's light, and then, of course, the other thing that a lot of people keep forgetting about with these movies that I thought was actually kind of a brilliant little subtext is that Rey is tempted by the dark side and called by it. Mm-hmm. And, of course, we later find out that's because she's a Palpatine, so of course. And, of course, Kylo, who's a dark side guy, is tempted by the light, which is something we've never seen. We've never seen a dark side guy being tempted by the light. Mm-hmm. Which that in and of itself I thought was cool. But when you look at the, that two sides of the same coin relationship that Rey and Kylo share, that bond, definitely in the Force, it's interesting because, the light side one's tempted by the dark side one's tempted by the light. And that's because his bloodline is all Skywalkers, like the ultimate lightsiders, right?
Right.
So I think that you could safely say that that's the answer to that question is the fact that they're not really related or anything like that, but there's definitely a strong bond between the two bloodlines. Mm. And so anybody in that,
gotcha,
is going to experience that.
Okay.
All right. Well, what do we got next?
Next comes from Julius Chalmers. Julius asks, "We still don't know how Snoke came into power and just ran the First Order. Crappy storytelling?"
No, I don't necessarily think it's crappy storytelling. I think you got to look at it from the standpoint of, look, you got a 2.5 hour movie. You can't cram every little tiny thing in there. I mean, look, if you guys remember, when we first saw A New Hope, I mean, we're dropped in the middle of a story.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think because of...
We don't know how the Emperor came to power either at that point.
Well, we eventually found out.
Eventually.
Yes,
but we're talking about...
You're talking about in 77 or actually in, 81?
And even with Empire, even when you add the other two movies, like if you want to be fair and say, okay, look, we're at Rise of Skywalker. Okay, at the point that we were at Return of the Jedi, we knew that Palpatine had somehow subverted the Old Republic. Well, the New Republic. Well, the Old Republic. But we don't know how.
Well, I think it's more so from the fact of, I think that would be okay if we didn't know that Palpatine created Snoke. So it's like, okay, if Palpatine created Snoke, how do you get him into a position?
Because
where
everybody
you have
forgets that
Palpatine.
Order. And first of all, to answer the question more directly, I'm sure that they're going to cover this in a book and a novel. They've already been covering like the brilliant Kylo Ren series that's out now. I don't know if the second issue is out yet, but they're covering like how did he become in charge of the Knights of Ren? How did he, they're actually going through a lot of the things that you sort of wondered in The Force Awakens, like because you could say the same thing about Kylo too. Well, how did this guy, who was once a Skywalker essentially and a Jedi, how did he become this bigwig in the First Order? I mean, obviously Snoke put him there. It's almost like kind of how Vader did, but you can almost say the same thing. I think we're going to actually find out in a movie or, well, maybe not a movie, but a novel or a comic or something like that. But if the Empire belonged to Palpatine, and there's remnants. And we know this because we know the canon books are talking about this. Palpatine had contingency plans. It's no different than anything else. It's like, why? Because remember, when Vader was put in charge of the Empire, Palpatine put him in charge, but nobody understand, well, who is this guy? But the reason why everybody listened to Vader, because he had this power that nobody understood, and nobody could take him out. And that's, I think, probably what happened with Snoke. Snoke came on the scene, just like, guess what? I'm running this now. Anybody's free to try and stop me.
Yeah, but I guess you gotta have to wonder, like, okay, like, if you look back, it's like, okay, we knew that the Republic kind of, all right, Palpatine basically duped the Republic into creating this whole army against the whole battle droids because he knew eventually this is what...
We only know that in the prequels, though.
I know, but what I'm saying is we knew that to happen. Like, okay, so there's this empire that's already... So by the time we get to, like, the original trilogy, okay, you have this whole mass of, like, there was a government, I guess what I'm saying. There was a government in place.
Well, I can hang, if you just started the statement there, I can hang with it. But when you're talking about the events of the prequels, remember, the prequels didn't come out till after the original trilogy.
Right, but there was still a government. Like, that's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if, you know, the last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away, and you can kind of, in your head, go, oh, this guy must have somehow...
Or, I mean, it's just more so like, okay, you can understand how you could amass that amount, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, okay, after Return of the Jedi, the Empire is done with explode. I mean, so now you got all these battleships. Where are you getting all these stormtroopers or Force Order troopers from? Where are you getting all this?
And this is the danger of when you have to read the novels in order to answer a lot of these questions. And I get that. But the flip side of that is, like, look, you guys, this is a big universe, which is one of the things we love about it. So you can't possibly answer every little question in the movie.
True.
So there were remnants, and then Hux's dad or whatever ended up being like a main architect of the First Order. Like, the First Order actually came from the remnants of the Empire. So you can hang with that. But it's true. It's like, when did Snoke come on the scene? You know, you know, like, hi, I'm George Snoke.
George,
I'll be your leader this evening. You know, I mean, it's true. I mean, it's because what's he going to do? Say, well, I knew Palpatine, and I mean, they're going to definitely have to cover. And I've said this before, when they didn't answer who he was in The Last Jedi, I'm like, okay, you're either going to have to do one of two things or both. You're really going to have to give us some serious backstory in 9 on him. Because especially once he was killed in 8, you're like, well, that was a waste.
That was brief.
Yeah. So at least tell us why he was around. And yeah, I mean, Palpatine kind of did that where he's like, well, I created Snoke, and you see a couple of Snokes in a, you know, little aquarium looking thing. But it's like, okay, I understand that. I know where he came from now, but what was the master plan of putting him in there? Why didn't you just come back?
Cool. And
I can understand that. I can understand why somebody would question that, and I think that that's definitely something that's going to have to be answered in a novel. So that's it, guys. It's going to have to be answered in a novel. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for our show today.
Yeah, man, that wraps it up.
Yep. So hopefully you guys, you know, like I said, leave the comments in the comments section about anything that we talked about today. We'd love to get your thoughts. And I guess until next week, I'm Eric Vansel.
No, I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.